Jamie Dimon just summed up the US economy on his recent earnings conference call, and it doesn't sound that good. However, I do believe that there are some opportunities in this environment, and that's what we're going to dive into in this video. So guys, smash that like button, subscribe if you're new, and of course leave a meow in the chat. You're watching More Money, let's get it. What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel where the goal here is to help at least 1,000 people achieve financial independence much sooner. And let's dive right into this one. CNBC actually did a good job of summarizing Jamie Dimon's quotes, and that's what I'm going to show you right here. So you can see Jamie Dimon has predicted two things, the good and the bad. So the good, he's saying that the economy continues to grow and both the job market and consumer spending and their ability to spend remains healthy. And so I actually think that that's more of like a for now prediction. I actually think that consumer spending declines, and I'm going to explain to you why I believe that we're already starting to see that a little bit later in this video. But I think it's more of a for now thing, especially as those interest rates continue to get increased. And he goes on to say that geopolitical tension, high levels of inflation, waning consumer confidence, the uncertainty about how high rates have to go, and the never before seen quantitative tightening and their effects on global liquidity are very likely to have negative consequences on the global economy sometime down the road. So effectively what he's doing is warning you and setting expectations. And the reason why he's doing that is because they're trying to shore up the balance sheet as much as they can to get ready for this recession or expected recession. And so it makes a lot of sense for him as a bank, which is highly levered on the economy, to be bracing for impact. And so on the good side, this is what Dimon was referring to about strong job growth. Notice that the non-farm payrolls actually increased by 372,000 jobs versus an already elevated expectation of 268,000 jobs in May. And so much higher than what the market was expecting. And you can see that the recovery in jobs subsequent to the pandemic remains. There are still increases in job growth each and every month. And the unemployment rate has now gone under 4%, which is where it was before the pandemic began. Now, the one thing that I will point out, however, and it's not shown in these charts, is that part of the reason why the unemployment rate is low is because our participation rate is not as high and it hasn't recovered back to pre-pandemic levels. And I think part of the reason for that is there's people who are on the lower end of the pay scale that just decided to never go back to work. But there are also people nearing retirement age, some close to that, or people who were retired that continue to work that decided to leave the workforce. And so I think, and this is just me saying it right now, you're not hearing it on the news or anything, that higher costs of living might bring some people back into the workforce. So we'll see how this works out. I think when savings dry up a little bit, more and more people might return to the workforce, but that's not a good reason why people should be returning to the workforce. People should be returning to the workforce to sort of elevate their lives, not to keep up. And you can see that the major problem to the economy is that inflation continues to run at a red hot rate. They just recorded a 9.1% year over year rate. And that's nuts. And what it really shows you is that the Federal Reserve is behind the curve here, and it's likely going to continue to remain hawkish and continue raising rates, which is expected to have very serious recessionary impacts to the economy. And I think we're already starting to feel this. I think, and once again, no one says this, but I think it usually takes around 12 to 18 months for the rate increases to work their way through the economy before we start feeling an impact on the economy. And so when you start seeing these monthly sort of rate increases or bi-monthly sort of rate increases, you haven't really seen the impacts of the previous rate increase. And so it could really wallop the economy all at once and go down, and you don't even see that until a year out. And so that's what I'm really worried about. It did happen previously in my life when they started raising rates right before sort of like the big recession in 2008, 2009. And so I'm kind of sort of getting feelings that that's kind of the direction that the economy is heading towards. But the difference is we may not necessarily have the quantitative easing tools that we had back then because the sort of government balance sheets are so bloated right now. So we'll see how this sort of plays out. But I just don't see good news on the horizon when we keep raising interest rates at the levels that we are. Mind you, they have to do it, but it's almost like a, once again, brace for impact type of situation. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. The University of Michigan actually conducts a consumer market sentiment survey. And you can see that the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index continues to be in free fall. And consumer sentiment is, in my opinion, very important because it can be a predictor of a recession. And notice how much the consumer sentiment has declined year over year from 85.5 to 50.2. And effectively what the University of Michigan is reporting is that consumers' assessments of their personal financial situation worsened about 20%. 46% of consumers attributed their negative views to inflation, up from 38% in May. And the share has only been exceeded once since 1981, which was during the Great Recession, which is that 2008-2009 recession. And they go on to say that across all consumers, only 13% expect their incomes to rise more than the rate of inflation, which is the lowest share since 2013. So in other words, there is negative real wage growth in light of the high levels of inflation. Now, while consumer spending has remained robust so far, the broad deterioration of sentiment may lead them to cut back on spending and therefore slow down economic growth. So that's how I believe a negative or worsening consumer sentiment can lead to a recession. People aren't spending when they feel sort of weary or nervous about the economy, and that's exactly what's happening right now. And recall, this wasn't the only time Jamie Dimon sort of told us to sort of brace ourselves. Remember the comments that he made earlier in July about an impending economic hurricane. And he just reiterated the same two things. He said there's two main factors, which is the quantitative tightening and sort of like the war and the conflict, which is pushing an increase on commodities, including food and fuel. But like I always say, there is opportunity in this environment. Just like there was in the Great Recession, there was a lot of opportunity back then. I was buying a lot of banks, insurance companies, consumer products companies. I was looking at home builders back then. So there's quite a bit of opportunity. And I do believe that there is opportunity in this market as well. And so one of the ways you can see what types of opportunities there are is by just looking at the tracker that the Patreons get access to. You can see here that with every market challenge, there are opportunities which I believe exist. And these are the ones that I'm trying to uncover and make available to the Patreons. Currently, there's 9 companies trading at a value that's less than 50% of what I believe their intrinsic value is. And this list is growing each week as the market continues to decline. There's 3 names that I did want to show you. One, Alibaba. You see me talk about Alibaba all the time. The shares have come down from approximately $120 per share to now around $100 per share. And so they're trading at approximately 35% of their intrinsic value. Another one is Alphabet. They're trading closer around 60% of their intrinsic value. And then there's the name that you guys may not necessarily have heard me talk about, but Foot Locker. Here's a name where it really has been beat up because Nike is starting to sell more direct to consumer. So Foot Locker is going to have access to less Nike merchandise, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be throwing the whole company out the door. Is Foot Locker worth $60 per share? Maybe not, but can you purchase the company using a cash secured put for, like the mid sort of $10, $15 per share area? You probably could. So there could be an opportunity with Foot Locker. Even at the current share price, I believe that they're trading at approximately 40% of their intrinsic value. So I think that there could be too much pessimism built into this name. And there's a whole list of other names where you may agree with me, you may not necessarily agree with me. In fact, there might be some situations where you might think, hey, I'm a bit too pessimistic. You might think the company's worth more, and thus the share price relative to their intrinsic value is a much greater discount. So there's so much discourse to be had and sort of opportunities to sort of wane through by having access to this tracker. And how do you get access to the tracker? Well, you can get access to it all of the research, including the tracker and all the models that support the tracker, at the lower tier of the Patreon. And I don't really talk about it a lot, but if you do want to join us, we have a live Zoom call every month where I save my best research for that call. And so if you want to join us on that call, you can join us each and every month at the upper tier for the Patreons. Now, I just mentioned that Foot Locker opportunity. If you guys want a little bit more information, I actually did a full deep dive into sort of that Foot Locker opportunity and analyze the whole thing. And you can actually get access to that video right here.